All right, just checking to make sure the streams are running. As always, it's Chuckleberry. Thank you guys for watching today. Just give me a second here. Perfect. And so today we are streaming on Twitch and on YouTube, and that's what we're going to be doing going forward. So no more streaming on Facebook, at least for the time being. Just limitations of the software that I'm using and the version of it that I'm using, the free version. I'm only able to stream to 2 sources, and so I'm going to be streaming to Twitch and I'm going to be streaming to YouTube. And the reason for that is just because obviously I get a much wider audience on those. And so I really hope if you've been watching me on Facebook that you'll take the leap with me over to YouTube or Twitch. And for now, YouTube is the best one to go to because while I'm doing these streams, I'm not able to see the Twitch chat. So if you want to be taking part in discussing things, please go to YouTube and watch the live stream there. But of course, if you're watching this later, or even if you're just watching it right now and you want to leave a comment on YouTube or Twitch, I don't know if there's comments on Twitch. I'm actually not too honest, or not too up on how Twitch works. I think there's a comment system, but I'm not 100% sure. But in any event, you can leave a YouTube comment or Twitch comment if those are a thing, and I will do my best to reply to each and every single one of them and have conversations about this stuff. I enjoy doing that. Now, the reason that I can't see Twitch chat is because my hardware has some technical limitations. So before we go forward, I want to talk about kind of what I'm trying to do with this channel, what I want to do with it, and the obstacles that I'm facing to get in there. And I'll be brief about that. But essentially, I just don't have very good equipment. I'm recording all of this on a Chromebook. I'm streaming on that same Chromebook, and I'm trying to edit video on that same Chromebook. The first 2 haven't been ideal, I wouldn't say, but they are. What would I say? I mean, it works. People are able to hear me. We're able to have conversations about interesting stuff, but it limits the kind of thing that I can make because any sort of editing on this thing just has not worked out for me. I've tried different software. I've tried all kinds of things. I've tried doing editing on my phone too. It's just not working out. It's not allowing me to make the kind of stuff that I want to make. I want to be able to make, like, for instance, videos around 10 minutes long that are highly edited, but they're more or less like this, like showing an article, showing a video, discussing it, reacting to videos, that sort of thing. That's one thing that I want to do. I also want to make longer, more highly edited videos that are deep dives into a particular cult or a particular subject. In fact, the reason why I started with Unicult is because I really wanted to make a big, long video about Unicult because I thought it was really interesting and just, fun to check out. But I'm still planning to do that, but it's going to take longer than I thought just because I'm not currently able to edit a video like that due to my hardware limitations. So the way that you can help me with that is for basically just do these things. Like my videos. If you enjoy them, leave a like. Subscribe to my channel. If you don't do anything else on the list, that's the one that will help me the most, is if you subscribe to my channel. Leave comments. Comments are really good, especially if we can get conversations going. That will help me a lot. If you want to be super duper nice to me, you can ring the little bell icon down there, because if you do that, it will give you a notification whenever I come out with new videos or when I start live streaming. That way, as soon as the stream starts, you can hop on here, start watching shit with me, reading some articles, learning about some kooky cult shit, and, join the party. And then if you want to be even more super duper nice, you can share the videos that you like with your friends, post them on your Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you got going on. Maybe you have friends or family who are in one of the cults that we talk about, and sharing a video like this might be useful. It might spark some critical questions within their mind, and ultimately, critical thinking is how you break cult programming and cult mind control. So yeah, doing all that stuff will help me a lot. The reason it will help me is because it'll get me more viewers, and more viewers means more monetization. If I'm able to more effectively monetize the content that I'm making, that will allow me to buy new equipment to make the kind of videos that I want to make, and then also to reach more people with this content. So if you want to help me out with that, if you're enjoying my videos, please consider doing that stuff. The other thing I want to do is, as often as I remember it, I want to highlight other YouTubers who are making similar content. So in this case, I want to highlight someone who's making some content about cults and highlight a specific video. So today, that would be Exmo Lex. Exmo means ex-Mormon. So Exmo Lex used to be Mormon. She is no longer. And she makes videos all about what it's like to be a Mormon, what it's like to leave the Mormon church, what it's like to be brainwashed by a cult, all that sort of thing. And in particular, she's really good at that last one that I mentioned, what it's like to be brainwashed. I imagine that experience is very foreign to most people. And it makes it, even if you do sympathize with cult members, it makes it hard to sympathize probably to the appropriate level. The idea of being brainwashed and that sort of thing is just, it's a difficult experience to relate. But Exmo Lex, or Lexi, I think is her name, she does a great job of that, better than anybody else that I've seen. So if you want to know what it's like to be brainwashed and in a cult, I would highly recommend going to Exmo Lex's channel and just watching all of it. But the video that I'm highlighting today is called Singing Hate Comments. So if you just go to YouTube and search for Exmo Lex Singing Hate Comments, or I'll probably remember to put a link in the description sometime after the video is posted, because these are live and then it just automatically gets posted to YouTube. So yeah, definitely check that out. It's really great. She reads comments that were left by current Mormons who aren't very nice to her, and she sings the comments back to the tune of popular Mormon hymns, which I imagine drives them just a little bit batty. Now, today what we're talking about QAnon and Donald Trump again. And so recently, I want to say it was yesterday. I'll look at the date here. Or 2 days ago. So 2 days ago, Slate came out with an article by Rachel Allen. The article is about Steve Hassan and his attempts to help people deprogram or rescue folks who find themselves in the QAnon cult or any other of the flavors of cultiness that have sprung up around former President Donald Trump. The reason why I wanted to talk about this article is because it's going to give us a forum to talk about a lot of interesting things. It's going to give us an opportunity to talk about Steve Hassan. Steve Hassan's work is really foundational to the way that I look at cults, and that lots of people do. He wrote a book called Combating Cult Mind Control, I want to say was the title of the book, in which he lays out the BITE model, which we've talked about before. BITE stands for behavior, I, information. I don't remember the rest because I have my head stuffed with QAnon bullshit right now because I've been watching it all day. But you can look it up if you want to. It's essentially a way of evaluating a group or movement and determining if they're a cult. And it's a really great, versatile model because it covers a lot of cults. It's comprehensive enough that most groups that you would consider a cult will fit into it. It's not perfect. There are definitely cults that don't perfectly fit the BITE model. But it's a really good one. The other reason why it's good is because most other models regarding cults and determining if something is a cult, it really only works for religious cults. But I mean, that's foolish. There's political cults. There's money making cults. There's businesses that are cults. There's just families that are cults, and there's not really a religious element. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And so anyway, his work has been great. He's a former cult member himself. He was a member of the Moonies. He got rescued. The methods that were used to rescue him were sort of non-consensual, and it was very distressing for him, and it was a bad experience. But it did convince him to leave the Moonies. And so due to that experience, he decided that he wanted to figure out a better way to help people who are in cults, and that's what he did. The reason it's going to give us an opportunity to discuss some other things is because this article is like critical of Hassan's take that QAnon is a cult, or that Donald Trump is a cult leader, or that his followers are cultists, that sort of thing. That's a helpful perspective for us to consider, because if they are not in a cult, or if they, I guess to put it more in Hassan's language, which is more accurate, if they are not under undue influence, then that kind of makes the issue different. You know, if really bad behavior occurs, there's more blame to place on the individual than on the group or on society, or, you know, whatever. So it's important for us to consider it for that reason. The other reason why it's important is because, you know, a lot of us have friends and family that are in this cult. It's causing a great deal of division among friendships, among families, and that sort of thing. And we're going to take a look at that too. Just lots of stuff going on. So anyway, this is going to give us an opportunity to talk about all kinds of cool shit surrounding the QAnon cult, surrounding the cult of Donald Trump, and that sort of thing. Now, before we get into that, though, I do want to mention that I kind of want to clarify. In a sense, I would say that there is like a general cult of Donald Trump, where it's a big umbrella. Underneath that umbrella, there are different groups. One group might be the hardcore QAnon conspiracy theorist. Another group might be, oh man, I'm blanking. Another group might be like evangelicals that aren't necessarily on board with the QAnon shit, but just because of the typical evangelical brainwashed fuckery, this is a really big deal to them, and they still think Donald Trump is president and shit like that. Like, there's all kinds of different groups that that end up becoming like a cult centered around Donald Trump. And so before we go to the article that I was just talking about, what we are going to check out is a video that was recently put out, or a news piece that was recently put out by PBS. And the reason why I want to watch this one is because it focuses on the ways in which the cultiness surrounding Donald Trump is dividing families and harming friendships and that sort of thing. So I think that's going to give us a lot of context for what's going on, and it's going to be helpful when we take a look at the criticisms of the idea that these people are in a cult. So this is on the PBS NewsHour YouTube channel, titled "Their Loved Ones Are Obsessed with QAnon Conspiracies. It's Tearing Their..."
A survey released by the Public Religion Research Institute this week found 15% of Americans believe the false QAnon idea that the government is controlled by a cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles. And just 1 in 5 Republicans fully reject the QAnon conspiracy theory. For many Americans,
only 1 in 5. And so I didn't actually know that, because we read that article a few days ago that indicated like 15% of Americans, or at least 15% of the old people that they polled, believed that a satanic cult runs Hollywood and Washington and is like selling children for sex and sacrificing them to demons and shit like that. So it was pretty shocking to hear that 15% of Americans believe that. But what she just mentioned is that only 1 in 5 Republicans was willing to say that they that they don't fully doubt the QAnon conspiracies. Or that's not like great wording. Let's go back so you can hear it from her mouth, because she said it better than I did.
All of Satan worshiping pedophiles. And just 1 in 5 Republicans fully reject the QAnon conspiracy theory.
That's what I meant to say.
Many Americans, those ideas are not only outlandish, they are dangerous and are tearing their families apart. We spoke with 3 people whose relationships have been hurt by these far-right, unfounded beliefs.
Hi, my name's Rachel, and my relationship with my mother has become completely estranged in the last year.
My parents have fallen down the QAnon rabbit hole, and we have become extremely obsessed with it.
I have a sister who believes in the QAnon conspiracy theory. She's watching YouTube videos, and she's just getting funneled down that algorithm, right?
And so I have personal experience with this too. I have lots of friends who are really into the QAnon stuff. And one friend in particular, there was a short period of time where he was like really aggressive about it. And he would be arguing with people about it all the time when he was supposed to be doing other stuff. And in one case, to me, it seems like it drove a good friend of mine out of our friend group because he was just so tired of dealing with it. He would just aggressively argue about this QAnon stuff. He would look for any opportunity to bring it up. And then he would get mean, and he's not a mean guy. He's one of the nicest dudes I know. And so that's a classic example of the cult personality replacing the genuine personality. That's something that's happening. That's something that happens in all sorts of cults. And that's exactly what these people are describing has happened to their family members.
Right? More and more kind of radical, bizarre things.
My dad was my best friend growing up. We did everything together. And then in just the past year, for sure, he's just changed into a different person.
My sister has always been my best friend. And she is to this day. I love her. It's hard to explain sister love. I love her in a way that I can't love anybody else. And I worry about her right before.
It's almost as if it's difficult for her to say that she's currently her best friend because she's probably really upset at her. But she was showing restraint and trying to can I help you, Sir Abel? She's showing restraint and that's really important. It's important to maintain the line of friendship when you have a loved one who's in a cult. The most important thing is to just remain their friend. More important than telling them why the cult is wrong, more important than asking them critical questions, anything, is being their friend. This is for a couple of reasons. One, because they need contact with outside sources of information. And then just hanging out with you, it will cause the critical questions to come up in their mind. But 2, they desperately need support. In a lot of cases, leaving a cult is going to be difficult for them to do. They may need a place to live. They may need food. They may need money, or just someone to talk to. Leaving a cult is not it's not an easy thing for someone to do. And it really helps people to make that decision to leave if they have a really close, tight-knit support network that they know will be able to help them.
For the pandemic year was the closest we ever were. We would go on walks. She would come over and play with the kids. Sorry. It's easier to feel angry at her than it is to start thinking about how much I miss her. I've always been really proud of my mom. She's a nurse. She's a cancer nurse. She's helped a lot of people.
You'll have to forgive my scrolling. I don't want to get copyright struck.
Moments and face death. She's a kind, loving person, and I feel like she's been tricked into believing all of these things that contradict her core values in a way that is so obvious to me.
It's called brainwashing. Her genuine personality, like I was saying, her genuine personality has been replaced by the new cult personality. That's how virtually every cult operates to some degree. Obviously, there's differing amounts of degrees. There doesn't have to be an authoritarian structure. There doesn't have to be a compound that people are going to, any of this shit, for someone to get brainwashed and for this new cult personality to take root. People can do it themselves. They were just talking about, one of them was talking about a family member would just go down this rabbit hole of YouTube videos, and man, I've experienced that, right? I watch these fucking cult videos, and then my newsfeed will just all of a sudden turn into the wackiest shit, oriented around whatever subject I was looking at. And so if you just spend just YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video for hours and hours and hours, that is brainwashing yourself. I'm not saying that you shouldn't spend a lot of time researching something, even from the perspective of like what seems like a negative perspective, like QAnon. That's totally fine. But if you're given to believe this stuff, and especially if you have like religious reasons for maybe being sympathetic to this, you need to be very careful about how insulated you are, the diversity of sources you're getting your information from, and like how much time you're spending consuming this content, how mindful you are while you're doing it, and just think really critically. And whenever you start talking about the subject or thinking about the subject when you're not watching YouTube videos or reading articles or whatever, and an idea comes into your head about that subject, just ask yourself, is that my idea, or is that the idea of the people that have been listening to about this subject?
Literally. They will connect the dots to everything that you touch, see, feel, whatever.
That's for sure.
That is where
my friend that I was just describing, I mean,
that's when I started to be fearful.
He just thought everything was a part of it. And that ended up corrupting his view of everything, right? He's the type of guy where he probably would have been concerned about COVID vaccines either way, but because it's happening right now, while he believes all this QAnon stuff is happening right now, it's like if we start talking about COVID vaccines, he's always going to end up relating it back to the QAnon stuff, and so QAnon stuff is affecting how he views, the vaccine and probably lots of other things, and that's how it is for lots of these people.
COVID vaccine because it's going to track you. Well, that's very dangerous for people to be believing that, because they're putting themselves at risk, but they're also putting more other people at risk. They're putting people at risk that they love.
It's not just like a funny conspiracy theory that unicorns and Bigfoot.
It is kind of funny though.
All of like aliens and all these things. They've been almost indoctrinated in, and they're like set in his core beliefs. It's exactly like a cult, and they like drink the Kool-Aid, and it's just really scary.
What happened in my relationship with my mother is that now I'm part of that. I'm part of this, evil force that she has to reckon with. She doesn't trust me. She doesn't believe. So
doesn't that shit sound familiar? Like if you guys are familiar with, I don't know why it's not letting me pause it. If you guys are familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance, that sense of if you try to talk them out of it, or if you're just even not part of it, you're the enemy, even if you're family. That happens in Jehovah's Witnesses. That happens in Mormonism to a lesser degree. And that's happening in this QAnon and Trump shit.
All of this stuff that, God, look at all these websites that prove otherwise. It came back into my face. And I think I'm at the point now where I've given up.
I pray for her every day that she will come to a realization that this is nonsense. I can't do much more than that, because if I discuss it with her, it's only going to break us apart.
I can't change him. I can't force him to do things. I just have to sit here and wait and hope for one day he calls me, texts me, shows up on my door, and is just like, yep, I was wrong. And then we go from there. But I hate that I have to wait, but it's for my dad, so I'll do it.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to go over that just to kind of highlight just how much of a cult this is, and how it's affecting the family members of the victim of this cult. in the same way that any other cult would. All right, bear with me here. More technical problems. I'm sure you're shocked. You know, these streams are usually just so smooth, like butter. And so I'm sure you're not used to any long pauses or me clicking on the wrong tabs or not showing the video that is playing in the background. Let's make sure this is going. Dope. Look at that beautiful head of hair. It's so wiry and good. So yeah, this is like I said, an article on Slate written by Rachel Allen, published 2 days ago. The man who wants to free Trump supporters from mind control. Steve Hassan was once in a group widely regarded as a cult, but he's since spent decades working to rescue other cult members. But now some wonder if he's gone too far. So Steve Hassan arrived at the Capitol steps on a weekday morning, ready to kill. A little extreme. Surrounded by hundreds of comrades, he prayed and fasted for 72 hours beneath American flags, convinced he was fighting for freedom like the founding fathers. At 20, Hassan, a one-time poetry major from Queens, New York, would have done anything to prove his loyalty to the president, a man who was facing removal from office, and who Hassan and his comrades had been told was an archangel. It was July 22nd, 1974, a few days before the House Judiciary Committee would vote to impeach Richard Nixon. So this is setting the stage for Steve Hassan's time in the Moonies. In the wake of a bad breakup earlier that year, Hassan had traded his creative writing studies for membership in the Unification Church. That wake of a breakup earlier that year is a key detail. Steve Hassan makes the argument, and I agree with him, that basically anybody can end up joining a cult if the conditions are right. Really, the cult just has to find you under the right set of conditions. And having recently suffered a bad breakup is very often the condition that they find and exploit in order to bring people into their group. So if you ever find yourself in a period of transition, if you ever find yourself like vagrant, like you're homeless, or you've had a bad breakup recently, your family has kicked you out, that sort of thing, and then some like religious folks approach you and you think their religion might be right and you didn't believe that before and you really, really like them and you like hanging out with them and all that shit, just think critically about what's going on. Just think real long and hard about all that, because you would not be the first person to get roped into a cult under such circumstances, and you would not be the last. Man, I really do believe that it could happen to any of us. So yeah, he traded in his creative writing studies for membership in the Unification Church, a Christian-based group often referred to as a cult, led by Sun Myung Moon, and popularly known as the Moonies. I'm sure I said that name wrong, and I apologize. Hassan quit college and his job, surrendered his bank account, and swapped his hippie-ish wardrobe for t-shirts that said, "I'm a Moonie and I love it." I got to get one of those t-shirts. If any of you has one of those t-shirts, let me know. I'd like one. His family was flummoxed at what had happened to their quiet son, previously an honor student, whose only group affiliations had been middle school chorus and their synagogue's basketball team. It took 2.5 years for the cell to break, and for Hassan to leave the group for good. Now 67, he has built a career for himself on trying to understand and atone for his past. That's no joke, man. He has worked very hard, pretty much from the time that he broke his conditioning, or at least soon after. And to this day, I mean, he's writing books. He personally counsels a lot of ex-cult members. He seeks them out and finds them himself. This is a tireless man working very hard. Yeah, it's great. But kind of trying to paint it like it's a bad thing or that he's just doing it out of like some sort of sense of self-flagellation. That is not the reading I've gotten from the man, but I suppose everyone is entitled to their opinion. A mental health counselor, Hassan flies around the country to hold interventions with cult victims, multi-day affairs involving lectures on psychology and cult behavior, a toolkit, as he puts it, to enable people to take back their minds and lives. He helps people develop a sense of self-worth, said Anthony Pratt-Canis, also saying that wrong, a psychology professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, who has recommended Hassan's approach in his work with victims of economic fraud. In recent years, though, Hassan has tried something more controversial, to apply his method to politics. So already Slate's kind of getting stuff wrong here, and I think they're not being fair to Hassan. So I don't think it's as controversial as they're making it out to be to suggest that there may be political cults. Political cults have existed for thousands of years. They've existed in the Roman Empire, and they exist today. So it's kind of strange to say that it's controversial to say that there might be a political cult. That's just weird to me. And Steve Hassan's work, the whole purpose of the BITE model, or at least the thing that really distinguishes it from other models of determining if something is a cult, is because it's inclusive for groups other than just religious cults. So I suppose if you believe that the only kind of cult that can possibly exist is a religious cult, then this sentence makes sense. Otherwise, it's kind of weird. I don't fully understand why they're doing this. You know, they spent a lot of time in this article trying to cast doubt on Steve Hassan's work. And I personally think it's because they are angry at Trump's supporters and they want to be able to remain angry. And if some of the people that they're angry at are doing the things they're doing because they're brainwashed, it's a lot hard to be mad at them. I think this is just a matter of political division. And I think this political division is going to shine through a lot in this article, you'll see. In 2019, he published The Cult of Trump, a book that laid out what he sees as the former president's cult leader tendencies and offered advice for the families of Trump extremists. At the time, the book gained little traction, dismissing its seemingly loose use of the word cult. The C word turns out not to be a very useful guide to the nature of charismatic leaders who get people to embrace unorthodox or irrational explanations of the world around them, wrote a reviewer in the Washington Post. I just don't know why he would say that. The C word is very useful. If there's a cult, people should know that it's a cult. Indeed, concluding that someone is under the control of a cult can seem to absolve them of responsibility for their beliefs and actions. There it is. Don't mind Uncle Jerry. He's just into that crazy cult thing. Well, I'm sorry that talking about the fact these people are in a cult makes you feel a little bit of empathy for them. I promise not to try to make you empathize with other human beings again. My bad. But since the January 6th insurrection, Hassan's profile has risen dramatically. Publications like the Boston Globe, the LA Times, and Vanity Fair have turned to him for articles about how to move past the cult of Trump and rescue loved ones. In May, Hassan spoke at a virtual conference on fact-checking hosted by the Poynter Institute's PolitiFact that included a keynote from Dr. Anthony Fauci. The book was dormant for a while, and when Trump left office, the interest in Steve exploded, said Alan Shefflin, a law professor at Santa Clara University and Hassan's longtime mentor. On one CNN interview in mid-January, Hassan sparked a response from Fox News and conservative commentators like Sean Hannity after he said, "The bottom line is all of America needs deprogramming because we've all been negatively influenced by Donald Trump." There's truth to what he's saying. I don't know the context of this statement. I imagine he's being a little bit metaphorical. He's not being totally literal here. I think he's trying to say that, like, we as a society have been negatively influenced by the cult of Donald Trump, and so we need to take a look at how that's affected us and that sort of thing. I don't know. I guess I shouldn't comment too much on what he's saying here. But what is interesting to me, or at least what this reminds me of, since it mentions the keynote from Dr. Anthony Fauci and PolitiFact's involvement. You know, one of the reasons why it's so easy for these people to buy into these QAnon conspiracies is because the media has been lying to them their whole life, and it's just so obvious to them. And so they don't feel that they have any other sources of information that they can trust. So it's ironic here that the media is trying to criticize Steve Hassan for calling out this cult when they are somewhat culpable for the creation of this cult. Hassan emphasizes that not all Trump supporters are part of this cult. In his book, and that's very true and important for us to all realize, in his book, he uses QAnon, the alt-right, and religious groups like the New Apostolic Reformation as examples of the former president's most ardent followers. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. There's kind of this Trumpism umbrella, and underneath the umbrella, there are several little groups, and many of those groups are cults. And they're all kind of, the reason why they all fit under that umbrella is because they kind of flow into each other. You know, the QAnon types will flow into the New Apostolic types, but then some New Apostolics won't believe the QAnon stuff, but they will be all right, you know, whatever. It's all that kinds of shit. But at the end of the day, they really are all in a cult. The people who are actually in a cult, not all Trump supporters. Diehard Trump devotees, according to Hassan, display blind faith and an unwillingness to look at any inconvenient facts. And that has definitely rang true for my conversations with a lot of folks who are into this QAnon stuff, as he said in a Vox interview. And so his primary advice for dealing with loved ones who fall into this category is not to argue, but to maintain the relationship, express support, and ask questions. And that's exactly what you should do. That's always been Steve Hassan's advice. That's the advice that I endorse. And that's what's helped me, having friendships, close friendships with people who encouraged me to think critically about the stuff I believed, went a long way to helping me escape the cult of charismatic evangelicalism. One Cult of Trump reviewer described it as an approach that would require the temperament of Fred Rogers, and that's not true at all. You just need to be someone's friend and have basic sympathy for them. It's not always easy, but it's not like they're making it out to be as ridiculous. We all have friends who are in cults. We all have friends who are maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, or just they're in a multi-level marketing scheme that's a cult. There's all sorts of cults out there. Lots of our friends are in cults, and they're not insufferable to us. I kind of hate that this article is trying to make it out as if it's necessarily going to be very difficult to maintain your friendships with these people. That may or may not be the case. And even if it is the case, I just don't think it's as extreme as they're making it out to be. Hassan does not exactly have the temperament of Fred Rogers. Gray-haired and bespectacled, he talks about love and neighbors in a slow, monotonal voice, but self-promotion leaks into his sermons. He sometimes sounds as eager to publicize himself. In parentheses, I scratch my head why everyone who cares hasn't read the Cult of Donald Trump book. He tweeted recently in response to a CNN segment on Trump and the Republican Party. As he is his bedrock pitch that anyone could fall for a cult under the right conditions. I mean, yeah, he does promote himself pretty aggressively. I can't disagree with that, but it's not it doesn't bother me too much. Building on the work of cult researchers and psychiatrists, Hassan has developed a model for evaluating whether people are unduly influenced, eliciting controversy along the way, not just for his expansive definition of cult, but his use of scientifically debated terms like brainwashing. So there's a lot to unpack there. So first they talk about undue influence. And kind of presented in a way as if that may or may not be a widely accepted way of looking at cults. But in my experience, that's exactly how most people determine whether or not something is a cult, especially people who are educated in these matters. Undue influence to me is the key factor between whether or not a group is a destructive cult or perhaps it's an extreme religion, or even, they are a cult, but they're not just inherently destructive, and, they might even be beneficial for their members. A good example would be Alcoholics Anonymous, which fits the Bite model to a T. Alcoholics Anonymous is a cult, but it's a cult that I think all of us know somebody who's benefited from. So yeah, that undue influence is really key. And then They say that he's eliciting controversy along the way, not just for his expansive definition of cult, but his use of scientifically debated terms like brainwashing. I don't think that the concept of brainwashing is, I don't think there's strong doubt about that in the scientific community. I think it's the word that they don't like. And so it's a semantic argument that they're leveraging against Hassan, which doesn't seem appropriate in this context. And then he says, they say that he expanded the definition of cult. I disagree with that. There's been political cults forever, like I said earlier. That's just such a weird thing to say. Maybe this author is just ignorant about cults other than religious cults. That's kind of what it's sounding like, but I don't know. Just really strange. After the Capitol riot, his platform is bigger than ever, but applying the framework of cults to politics is a complicated maneuver, and some worry that, in its sensationalism, it risks dividing the nation even further. Yeah, and we just saw some evidence of that division. We just saw family members talking about how they're not able to interact with these people anymore because it's just so bad. So on top of the political division that already exists just as a nature of politics and as a nature of this of these last two presidential cycles that we've had that have been particularly nasty and I would say bad for the country, we also have to deal with the fact that there are cults arising around this that are also dividing families and friends and all that sort of thing. It's kind of a weird thing to put here, but whatever. I guess just to show that he was in school. I don't know. That's very strange. So this is flashing back now to his time in Moonies. Hassan was a junior at Queens College in New York when his girlfriend broke his heart. It was January 1974, and he was already in the midst of an existential crisis, having turned down his father's entreaties to run the family hardware store in favor of studying poetry. So going back to that, the girlfriend breaking his heart, it put him into a state where he was susceptible to cult mind control. Now, with a year before graduation, he worried that he had few career prospects. Also another factor. A lot of times cults will offer very minor economic security, like they'll provide you with enough food to live on and housing and something like that. And so it makes you feel like if you don't have a support network elsewhere, you have this support network. And so you start building yourself into that, but you end up getting enslaved in it because then they make demands of your time. And those demands of your time make it so that you can't seek regular employment or make money so that you can get your own place, and you end up getting stuck and basically become a slave to the organization. That's what happened to me. So like I say, I've been a member of two cults. I was a member of the cult of evangelical, charismatic evangelicalism. And then I was also in a radical anti-abortion cult. And man, that radical anti-abortion cult, they did the same shit that the Moonies do, where they give you support, they make you rely on it, and then they use that relationship to just make you work and work and work and work for them. It's wild. And then you get stuck, and it's just like this it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's not the right term. It's like a hamster wheel. It's a fucked up hamster wheel where you have to work a lot. It sucks. Now, with a year before graduation, he worried that he had few career prospects. One day, Hassan was reading in the cafeteria when three young women started talking to him. And it almost always is young women, and oftentimes in a group. So always be on the lookout for that. In fact, one time I think it was probably the Moonies, trying to recruit a very old man in a Carl's Jr., and they bought him cheeseburgers and stuff. And these two little Korean ladies were just sitting there talking to him about Jesus and stuff, trying to recruit him. And he was oblivious to it. It was really something wild to watch. Hassan thought the women were pretty. After class, on their invitation, he drove to their house to hang out with 30 other young people who spent the night musing about social justice and how to change the world. Hassan went home. He later wrote in his book, Combating Cult Mind Control, feeling happy for the first time in weeks. And yeah, imagine that. If you think man, why do people join cults? It doesn't really make sense. just put yourself in this guy's shoes. He was depressed as hell, I'm sure. And he says, feeling happiness for the first time in weeks. I have clinical depression, and I've had that experience where you're just not able to feel any sort of positive emotion at all for a long time. And if some group comes in and overnight you're able to feel it, and you're able to feel that when you're with them, and you're not able to feel it when you're with others, and you think that they cured your depression, it makes it really fucking easy to join these cults. This was the first step of Hassan's recruitment into the Unification Church. Sun Myung Moon, I apologize for butchering those names. But this guy's a real asshole, so I don't really apologize for butchering his name now that I think about it. Sun Myung Moon, a millionaire businessman and self-ordained reverend, founded the group in 1954 in South Korea, claiming Jesus chose him as the new Messiah. This happens a lot in Korea, by the way. We'll get into that in later videos, but the experience that Steve Hassan just mentioned, being approached by women and then being brought to a cult compound and discussing things with them, like that happened to me, but it was a different cult that did it to me. It's not one that I joined. We'll talk about it in another video, but yeah, these women approached me and talked to me, invited me over to their compound to discuss the Bible in that case, like the same exact shit. And their cult, it's called World Mission Society Church of God. Their cult believes God has now transformed into God the Mother, who is this old woman that lives in Korea. And there's just tons of cults that originating from Korea. It's really interesting. A lot of Christian cults originating in Korea or very active in Korea. By 1976, a New York Times article declared the group the hottest and most controversial of the religious cults that dominated the decade, with its claimants of 30,000 followers, 5,000 members, and $10 million a year in donations and sales. They're a lot bigger now. I am your brain. What I wish must be your wish, Moon was reported to have told followers. So if people are saying that shit, you're probably in a cult. And people are saying that shit and they're joking, but other people think that you're in a cult. There's a pretty good chance you're in a cult. You might want to really think about that. By 1982, the group would even boast ownership of a newspaper, the Washington Times, a publication active today in conservative circles and still owned by a company connected to Moon. Like many cults of the era, the Unification Church poached young people at their vulnerable. So I don't know a whole lot about the Moonies, but I mean, I know a little bit about them, and they're very concerning. And they're a very dangerous cult. But if I'm talking about the Moonies and I get anything wrong, please correct me in the comments. If you've been in the Moonies, leave some comments and tell us what it was like, or if you have family members that were. It's not a cult that I have a whole lot of familiarity with. Whenever the clean-cut, smiling Moonies can find them on city streets or college campuses, they engage young Americans in discussions of the state of the country or of their souls, the 1976 New York Times article had said. There are a lot of lonely people walking around. One Unification Church official said at the time, Hassan was the perfect target. According to his sister, Tia Luba, he was an independent but insecure kid as he struggled under the weight of disapproval from his father. Through a formulaic recruitment, dinners of excessive flattery, lectures on the scientifically proven, quote-unquote, arrival of the second Messiah, weekend retreats in upstate New York. Oh, yeah. The Moonies offered Hassan another version of himself. I was being told I'm a leader. So again, they're building this new personality. They're implanting it in him so that it replaces his true, genuine personality, replaces the true self. Hassan recalls that he questioned the group at first, but was quick to give the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, if you're in a group that people think is a cult, take a look and see if you are very often giving the people in your cult or the beliefs, that sort of thing, if you're giving them the benefit of the doubt. And really evaluate if they deserve to have the benefit of the doubt. If Moon was the Moshiach, Hebrew for anointed one, I reasoned, then I will be fulfilling my Jewish heritage by following him. he, referring to Hassan, wrote in his book. Soon he was selling candies and flowers on the streets to raise money, recruiting students, giving lectures at the group's headquarters in Manhattan, and he wrote, earning the personal approval of Moon the Father himself. I need to grab some water, guys. Give me 1 second. Apologies. Hassan bought into the most radical beliefs of the group. He remembers agreeing that sex outside of the Unification Church marriages, arranged through infamous mass weddings, still ongoing today. And you can watch videos of that shit. It's creepy. They'll just marry like hundreds of people at one time. They're arranged. It's fucked up, man. Often, like, I've heard that sometimes they get married to people that don't even speak the same language as them. There's like very little thought put into it. It's just kind of about, isolating its members, and that like they want to obviously have these people have children so that there are more Moonies for the future, that sort of thing. It's fucked. But yeah, so he remembers agreeing outside of Unification Church marriages deserve the death penalty, and that the Holocaust was necessary because Jewish people didn't believe in Jesus. Ooh. I don't care if Moon is like Hitler. I've chosen to follow him, and I'll follow him till the very end, he once told ex-members of the group when they tried to convince him to get out. Oh, man. But leaving the group never seemed like an option anyway. Hassan remembered that Moon rented a movie theater to show The Exorcist, a newly released film that he upheld as prophecy of what would happen if one left the Unification Church. The current iteration of the Unification Church, now called the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, responded to a request for comment in an email to Slate, quote, Steve Hassan likes to capitalize on outrageous things that he heard people say during his brief membership. But to say that they are true beliefs in the Unification Church are simply untrue. The spokesperson additionally said that Hassan has been on a personal crusade against the Unification Church and other new religious movements for decades now. All right, so there's a lot of good shit in this paragraph. So first of all, take a look at all the nutty fucking shit this guy did. You probably feel like you're somebody who would not do anything like this, anything like what he just described ever. But man, I'm telling you, and if you look at enough cases of this, you'll see that under the right conditions, basically anybody can get roped into a cult, and then they end up doing this stupid ass shit. That's what happened to me, man. There's a lot here in this paragraph that I can relate to. So, for instance, he said that he remembers agreeing that sex outside of the Unification Church marriages deserved the death penalty. There was a period of my life where I believed that. I bought into dominionism for a very brief period of time. Dominionism basically teaches like instituting Christian theocratic law in the United States and like executing adulterers and homosexuals and shit. And there was a while where I begrudgingly accepted it because I had been convinced of it biblically at the time, and but I didn't like it. I just felt like, but it's in God's word, so it's got to be true. And yeah, it was awful, man. But that's what being in a cult will do to you. Then he says, I don't care if Moon is like Hitler. I've chosen to follow him, and I'll follow him till the very end. That's very familiar to me too. I remember making excuses for the leaders of the cult, the anti-abortion cult that I was in all the time. Leaving the group never seemed like an option anyway. That's like I discussed, they make you reliant on them. They occupy all of your time. They isolate you from others. They make you socially ostracized. And so leaving just isn't really practical. In some cases, people just don't literally have a way to leave. They don't have somewhere to live. They don't have a way to get food, social validation, just all that stuff. Renting a movie theater to show The Exorcist that he believed was a prophecy of what would happen if one left the church. Man, that reminds me of weird shit that I used to do too. There's just stuff like I'm so embarrassed. I don't even want to talk about on here. I'm sure that I'll talk about everything because I have a lot of really funny and interesting stories about my experiences when I was in the anti-abortion cult. But they are very embarrassing. And so since they're so embarrassing, I'm going to save each one probably for their own video. So at least I get something out of sharing it, justify the pain. But yeah, man, I used to set up, let's just say I used to set up all sorts of object lessons to try to convince people that abortion was murder. And I'm very embarrassed by some of the things that I did in that pursuit. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is this whole statement where the Moonies are trying to discredit Steve Hassan. That's exactly what happened to me when I left the cult. And that's what happened to lots of people who left that cult is as soon as you were gone, you were fucking dead to them. And not only that, you were the scum of the earth when you were alive. Specifically, I remember me and my partner at the time when we left, they said that we had stole a bunch of receipts from them. I guess just to like get back at them and make their life difficult or some shit. I don't fucking know. But they insisted that we stole these fucking receipts. They told everybody that we stole these receipts and just turned everybody us like overnight. Craziest shit. And that happens in all sorts of cults. Make sure I didn't lose my place here. There we go. Then one early morning in April 1976, a sleep-deprived Hassan fell asleep at the wheel of a fundraising van and collided with an 18-wheeler. He broke his leg, and after 2 weeks in the hospital at his sister Tia's house, a rare respite from the unification of the insular world. And sleep deprivation is a common tactic for cult brainwashing, as is overworking, which we're seeing more of here. While Hassan's parents had argued with him about his newfound life, even sending him to their rabbi for guidance, Tia had never reprimanded Hassan for his choices, an approach that Hassan would later counsel his own clients to follow. But at the time, few relationship-based interventions existed for cult members. And I don't recall if they get into this in this article, but we'll find out. But the kind of deprogramming that Hassan was subject to was not very nice, totally unethical, just not okay to do. And I would say he was basically kidnapped. I don't know if he would use those words, but those are my words. And so cult deprogramming has changed a lot since then, and a lot of that has been because of Hassan's work. So I'm very grateful to him for that. And so, yeah, and if you have a friend or family member in a cult, in a destructive cult, and you're really worried about them, I would encourage you to look into Hassan's work. It will help you. One day he was sitting on Tia's couch when his father walked in and moved his crutches to prevent him from leaving. Okay, so yeah, they are going to go into the account of how they did this. So first of all, if somebody is crippled or injured and they can't walk, taking away their crutches is essentially imprisoning them where they are. Imprisoning somebody is not a good way to make friends with someone. It's not a good way to maintain a friendship, and it's definitely not a good way to convince people to leave a cult. That's insane. The cult attracted him by being nice to him and becoming his friends. And the fact that people think that his father thought it was going to be okay to essentially imprison him and that was going to deprogram him or help his son is just insane. So while we're reading this, it's a really good idea to think about if you have a friend or family member who's involved in something that you don't approve of, like there's a right way to help them with that and there's a wrong way to help them with that. Several deprogrammers, all former members of the Unification Church, arrived to try to talk him out of his beliefs. So yeah, strangers that he doesn't know just show up and start telling him that he's wrong. I'm sure that was real pleasant for him, and I'm sure it was real convincing. Hassan silently prayed throughout their lecture, feeling furious with his family. The next day, Hassan's father told him they were going to visit his mother, but when they drove by the exit to his parents' house, Hassan realized he had been tricked into further deprogramming. So more imprisonment, and in this case, adding on kidnapping. While it might seem hard to believe, my first impulse was to kill my father by reaching over and snapping his neck, Hassan wrote. As a member, I had been told many times that it was better to die or kill than to leave the church. And yeah, man, that's brainwashing for you. I'm sure that if you asked Hassan if he would ever have even thought to hurt his father before becoming a member of the Moonies, he would say that he never had. I don't know that for sure, but I would be shocked if that was not the case. But when you're brainwashed, it's difficult for you to distinguish between your thoughts and the thoughts that are being produced by the personality the cult has implanted. You have to constantly, if you're out of it and you're trying to think critically like I am, you have to constantly second guess your own thoughts to determine if they're even yours to begin with. And at this time, Hassan was still in this thing. And so he wasn't even trying to distinguish between thoughts that originate from his true, genuine self and thoughts that originate from the cult personality. The cult personality was essentially possessing him in a way. That's kind of what it's like. And, you know, I've had that experience. I haven't had the experience of being sort of possessed by the cult personality in a way that I wanted to hurt anybody, but I definitely experienced in the form of speaking tongues, of prophesying, of doing all kinds of nutty shit, thinking that I saw a demon in one's eyes and trying to cast out the demon, like just dumb shit like that. So, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Obviously, it just has, that experience led him to want to do different things than what it led to me wanting to do. He made me want to babble and say weird shit in church. He wanted to snap his father's neck. Tomato, tomato. When they arrived at the new location, Hassan refused to get out of the car, threatening violence. His father began to cry, which, by the way, is justified. They fucking kidnapped him. His father began to cry. He asked me what I would do if it was my son. Hassan had seen his father cry only once before, at the passing of his own mother, and the rare emotion caught him off guard. He agreed to deprogramming sessions, determined to prove his family and himself that he was in his right mind. But after 5 days, so this is key, Hassan was doing this for himself at that point. That's the only way this is ever going to work. Kidnapping, taking people's crutches away, that sort of thing, that's just not an option. But after 5 days, Hassan had an epiphany. He read a speech that Moon had given to Congress in which he professed his respect for Americans, claiming that they weren't foolish enough to be brainwashed. What Hassan recognized as a lie, given that he had heard Moon mock American stupidity dozens of times. Once I connected those dots, it was like a house of cards coming down in my head, Hassan said. And yeah, I mean, that definitely reflects my experience too. So, like, the cult framework a lot of times will create a really elaborate set of beliefs. Like in my case, it was oriented around the Bible, and that's what's going on with the Moonies too. But it's really elaborate, and because it's really elaborate, it's really delicate. So if you're able to engage with a cult member about that material intelligently and kindly, that can actually be helpful. Like if you are well versed in Christian theology, for instance, and you can talk to people about these more esoteric biblical subjects, you can help people understand that the Bible doesn't really say what the cult leaders are telling them that it says. And while that might not be important to you because you think, well, I don't really care about their specific beliefs, I just don't like that they believe in this, that they believe in God or they're part of this religion or whatever, it will help them to kind of break things down, to break down that house of cards, to pick a card out and watch it crumble and realize that their ideology doesn't make sense. It doesn't even make internal sense because it contradicts the source material. And that helps a lot of people leave. It definitely helped me leave charismatic evangelicalism, no question. The cards kept tumbling in the following months and years. Hassan moved back in with his parents. He said he felt terrified he would be killed by members of the Unification Church, guilty that he had recruited other young people, and deeply embarrassed that he had fallen for such lies in the first place. And yeah, man, I definitely feel really bad for recruiting people. I did that too, and I'm extremely embarrassed. all that stuff. I get it, bro. The shame doubled under his father's blame. On particularly bad days, Tia said she remembers driving from her home in New York to Boston to make sure Hassan wasn't going to hurt himself. He had no support afterward, she said. Stephen spent the rest of his life trying to figure out what they did to him. Yeah, it's a very dysphoric experience, leaving a cult and like deciding that you're not going to think that way anymore. Like, because it just consumes everything in your life. And then when you decide I don't want to look at the world that way anymore, it's hard not to. It's like a trippy experience. It's terrifying. It's disorienting for sure. And it's difficult to deal with for a long, long time. It's so destabilizing that like a lot of times you don't even feel like you can know what's true anymore. It can cause all sorts of problems with relationships. If you already have problems with depression and anxiety, it can greatly increase them. That happened to me too. It's rough, man. It's not good. It's fun to laugh at the weird things cults believe. I do that all the time. Sometimes I am sharing stuff on this channel just because I think they're funny or interesting or whatever. But it's important for us to understand the kind of suffering this stuff can cause too. And of course, not every cult is destructive like this. Some of them are actually pretty helpful, like Alcoholics Anonymous, or so far my experience with Unicult has been really positive. So Jim Piccolo was taught to fear people like Steve Hassan. But when he arrived at a friend's house for an intervention in 1993, he could find little that was intimidating in the mild-mannered counselor sitting before him. Piccolo, 20 years old at the time, had joined what he later called a quasi-Buddhist computer programming mind control cult. Quasi-Buddhist computer programming mind control cult. That sounds like a pretty dope cult. I might join that one if it still exists. If anybody knows what this quasi-Buddhist computer programming mind control cult is, let me know. Leave a link in the comment. I want to check that shit out. And his family and friends had organized a meeting for him with Hassan. Hassan walked through the methods that cults use to recruit followers, showed documentaries on other cults, and shared his own story. About 4 hours into the session, Piccolo said he felt a popping sensation, as if he had woken up from a year-long dream where I had been living someone else's life. And so I don't recall a popping sensation, but I definitely now feel like I was in almost a dream-like existence back then that I've woken up from. Piccolo's experience was quite different from the argumentative and involuntary confrontation associated with traditional deprogramming. And this shift in the approach to counseling cult victims has defined Hassan's career. For a few years after leaving the Unification Church, Hassan worked as a deprogrammer, a self-imposed penance for his own involvement in recruiting members. I'm, again, not sure that I agree with that statement. I guess in some way you can look at stuff Hassan has said and derive that from it. But to me, it just feels like it just seems like he has a sense of duty that he feels to help others that have gone through what he's gone through. That's the way I see it. I don't feel like this is self-flagellation or doing penance. But a combination of burnout and mentorship from Robert J. Lifton, who's also a great source on information about cults and what it's like to be in a cult and that sort of thing. A psychiatrist well known for his work on brainwashing, inspired Hassan to change tack. He got his master's degree in counseling psychology, started counseling cult victims and their families, and in 1988 published Combating Cult Mind Control, a part memoir, part handbook that launched him into the small field of cult research. The number one thing that I think Steve's contributed is a way to have people exit a highly manipulative, undue influence situation, said Piccolo. In our work, we recommended an approach based on Steve's, and that is help the person develop a sense of self-worth and help them question the situation they're in. It's exactly what you got to do. Honestly, man, when I was in the anti-abortion group, if somebody just sat down with me, just showed me how pointless it all was, how hypocritical the leaders were, how how I was just being used, all that sort of thing. Just really kindly laid it all out for me. I might have been convinced to leave just from that, because I was lucky. I had family that I could go live with, and that way I could like feed myself and that sort of thing. Yeah, man, I think it's a good thing. Hassan calls his method the strategic interactive approach. He advises families and friends on how to maintain a relationship with somebody they believe has joined a cult. So that's the most important thing too. I agree with that. If you are worried about a family member, I think I said it before, but just to say it again, if you're worried about a family member or friend or whatever who's in a group that you believe is exerting undue influence, the most important thing that you can do to help them is to continue to be their friend. That doesn't mean that if they abuse you, you have to take it or remain in that relationship or anything like that. You do what you got to do to take care of yourself. But if you're able to, and you care about this person, you really want to help them, it's a good idea to try to maintain friendship. If the cult victim agrees, Hassan travels and their loved ones, leading a 3-day retreat that resembles a psychology 101 class. He walks his studies like the Stanford prison experiment to explain how influence works, talks about his time in the Unification Church, and brings in ex-members of the client-specific group to talk about their experiences. I don't know. I didn't know that he actually uses Stanford prison experiment as an example in his interventions. I kind of hope he doesn't. The Stanford prison experiment does not show what people think it shows. Maybe one day I'll do a video about that. Hassan also counsels people who have already left coercive groups about how to rebuild their lives. One client told me that Hassan Hassan helped her develop a sense of self-worth after 12 years in what she called a Bible cult. And yeah, man, Bible cults will tear down your self-worth like nothing else. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Bible or being Christian or anything like that, but there's a culture that's sprung up around Christianity, and within that culture, there are a great number of cults. And those cults have done a tremendous amount of damage to people. People close to me. It's done great damage to people like me, to me specifically, to my former partner, who was a member of several Bible cults. Just totally wrecked her life in a lot of ways, man. I don't like that shit. Unlike all the therapists she had seen over the past decade, Hassan affirmed that there wasn't something wrong with her because she joined the group. I was barely 18 years old and I had vulnerabilities and was recruited using techniques that they use on other people, she said. Yeah, it can happen to anybody. And one of the best ways to help somebody get out of a cult is to help them realize, I'm not saying anything bad about you. I'm not saying that you're dumb. I'm not saying you're gullible or naive. Sometimes those things might be true, and sometimes cults do use those things to, do exploit those things to gain new members. But generally speaking, they can get anybody if they find them at the right time and right place. And I highly relate to this too, because when I joined the anti-abortion cult, I was 18 years old and had significant vulnerabilities. Hassan is less interested in what a given group believes than in the tactics they use to reel in new members. And that's the big difference between me and Hassan. I think that the beliefs are relevant. And then more than that, I believe that the beliefs are often entertaining. And so I like to take a look at that. I am of the belief that the right to believe unusual, bizarre, unorthodox things is very precious. I agree. The issues for me really comes down to the issues of how the group recruits and indoctrinates. The methodology a group will employ, Hassan once said in an interview. The distinction between methodology and belief has become his mantra. He developed a system for determining whether a group is indeed a cult, and moreover, a dangerous one. In combating cult mind control, Hassan describes what he calls his BITE model, an acronym for the 4 components of mind control: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. For example, modes of behavioral control could include dictating where someone lives, whom they associate with, and what they eat and drink. Hassan believes that there are healthy and unhealthy ways of influencing people. Destructive mind control can be determined when the overall effect of these 4 BITE components promotes dependency and obedience to some leader or cause. And that's really the distinction. And generally speaking, when I'm looking at a group trying to determine if they're a cult, that's kind of the only thing that I'm looking at. to determine if they actually are or are not a cult. If they fail that test, I wouldn't rule them out. I would look to other models and try to apply that. He wrote that on the website. Over the years, Hassan has worked with clients struggling to leave not only what most think of as traditional cults, but also cults of parental alienation, human trafficking, multi-level marketing, and more. Yeah, I mean, like, cults are rampant. They may not seem like it if we're only including religious cults, but if we're willing to explore groups outside of religion, I mean, I really think that almost all of us know somebody who's currently in a cult. The client who got out of the Bible cult told me that Hassan helped her deal with the aftermath of leaving not only the cult, but also an abusive marriage that she termed a double indoctrination. Yeah. Yeah. And that's another big thing with Bible cults is that it's going to have to be its own video at some point, but they oftentimes just destroy any sense of like healthy relationship between men and women. Oh man, it's bad. But I can just talk about that all day. We'll get distracted. Online, Hassan's definition of cult-like behavior can seem particularly wide-ranging. Of the royal family's treatment of Meghan Markle, he wrote on his blog, any organization willing to maintain its public image by sacrificing the well-being of its members relies on many of the same psychological theories and tactics used by authoritarian cults. And so I don't understand why they're taking exception with this. He's not saying that they're a cult. He's saying that they're using tactics that are used by cults. He's making a distinction, but by saying that they are using tactics that are used by authoritarian cults, he's implying that they're not necessarily an authoritarian cult. So I don't get why they have a problem with that statement. But I got to admit, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. I know that there was some sort of controversy with the royal family recently and Meghan Markle. I don't know who the fuck Meghan Markle is. I don't know what happened with the royal family. So if you know, maybe let me know in the comments or something. So maybe there's some sort of context that I'm missing, and this criticism is valid. In early April, he was quoted in an independent article attesting to the cult-like aspects of SoulCycle. I would say that Steve has a tendency in some way to see everything as undue influence because he's primed to see it that way, says Shefflin. I feel that he's still the victim of the cult. I think that one of the things that happens when you come out of a cult is you have tremendous distrust. You have to become the center of your own universe. I definitely don't think that Steve Hassan is the center of his own universe. That's not remotely the vibe I get from that guy. Kind of a weird thing to say. Also, I don't know what SoulCycle is. Did they mention SoulCycle earlier? I feel like this is the first that we're hearing about it. Let me know if I'm missing something. If you know what SoulCycle is, let me know about that too. Even before treading into politics, Hassan was familiar with controversy. At the 2012 International Cultic Studies Association Conference, Hassan sparred with other participants over how to define terms like cult and brainwashing. A Toronto Star article declared the conference an emotional tinderbox. Hassan's argument that there is a continuum of cults, some good, some bad, is in itself seen as controversial to some academics who object to applying the word cult too broadly. I think that the concern that one is applying the word cult too broadly, and the concern that saying that some cults might be a good thing is correct, are two totally different things. It does not make sense for me to conflate the two or connect them the way that they are. They are valid, like, subjects of conversation and inquiry and research. But I just don't think that what they're saying here is correct. Michael Langone, the executive director of the ICSA, said that many counselors of cult victims, not just Hassan, tend to use the term cult rather liberally. But many sociologists have long been critical of terms like cult and brainwashing, Langone explained. I think with some good reason, they're not precise terms. Are they not precise terms? I don't know, man. Because I don't think that there's a completely agreed upon definition of either of those. To make things simple, let's just pick one. Let's pick the word cult. There's a lot of different definitions of cult, and a cult means a lot of different things to different people. But if the question is, are they not precise? It just depends on how they're using the word. You can use the word in a very precise way. Like a lot of times in my videos, I'll say that I'm applying the BITE model to a group to determine if they're a cult. That's extremely precise. Either they meet the BITE model or they don't. It doesn't get any more precise than that. So I don't think that they're really portraying the issue well, but I also assume that the author of this article isn't like an expert on cults. So I suppose we should give them somewhat of a pass. It's just worth mentioning, and it's really important for us to be careful about the way that we think about cults. When Hassan expanded his definition of cult even further with the cult of Trump, he argued that Trump exhibits the personality traits and behaviors of a cult leader, and he definitely does. That's going to be a video one of these days soon. Trump, he writes, fits into the pyramid power structure characteristic of destructive cults. A single leader enabled by his most ardent supporters and followed by legions of fringe members. Referring to his BITE model, Hassan detailed how he thinks Trump controls, for example, his followers' behavior by shunning those who do not promise absolute loyalty, shading critical thinking with phrases like fake news, and phobias such as fear of immigrants. And so with this, it's true that Trump is using cult tactics to control people to some extent. I agree with that. But what I think differently than what this article is portraying, that most of the cultic elements of this movement aren't top down from Trump to the followers. There may be some of that, but mostly it's like people on the internet who went down a fucking QAnon rabbit trail and became convinced of some ridiculous shit, and Trump just happens to be a part of that mythology, whether Trump intended to insert himself into that or not. And then, and it's not just QAnon, all these other groups that could be considered cultic groups surrounding Trump. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Trump may or may not have any direct contact with anybody who has contact with them. But they're part of these other movements and organizations that are cults and happen to incorporate Trump into their beliefs. Writing this was a chance to reach a world audience in a way I could never reach with a generic book about cults, Hassan said. That's true. Just by creating controversy, it's going to get people to read that book, and reading that book, I believe, will probably be helpful to people. I haven't read it yet. Maybe I'll do a review of that. If you guys want me to do a review of that or of combating cult mind control, let me know. And if people want it, I'll do it. Cult is the kind of word Trump loves. It's instantly alarming, inherently sensational. It can mean so many things, and it can mean nothing. That's kind of, there's some truth to that, right? A lot of people will use the word cult too liberally, but that doesn't mean that it's not a useful word. It's a very useful word if you choose to use it narrowly, or at least with an appropriate level of narrowness. One night at a music club in 1998, a mutual friend introduced Hassan to a woman named Messia Landau, whose relative had been in a religious cult years ago. Landau, a science writer and anthropologist, remembers peppering Hassan with questions, and he directed her to the FAQ section of his book. I was like, "Are you kidding?" Landau said. But then a Beatles cover band began playing, and the two started dancing, and 3 months later they were engaged. Partly what attracted me to him was this sense that he was engaged in the larger struggle, if you want to put it in terms of good versus evil, she said. The larger struggle has been less grandiose and more personal over the years. In 1991, Hassan's first wife, whom he was divorced from at the time, drowned in a local pond while walking her golden retriever. Hassan took rescue training courses and, along with her parents, donated rescue gear to the fire stations. You don't want anyone else to have to go through what you went through yourself, Hassan said as he began to cry. And I feel like they're talking about this to continue this narrative that Hassan is just doing all this stuff because he feels guilty about his time in the Moonies, but is really kind of ridiculous. But that's so silly. I mean, it's really tragic that his wife drowned, And it's really sweet that in reaction to that, he tried to help other people not have to go through that. Like, what the fuck? Hassan has spent his career trying to prevent people from going through what he went through. But it's also been a career spent searching for validation, the kind he once sought from the Unification Church and in the years since from academics, the media, and his own family. You know, I don't agree with that either. I don't think Hassan doesn't come off to me as a guy who's just desperately seeking validation. He already has plenty of validation. He's widely accepted as one of the foremost experts on cults. He's a thought leader on the issue. He's tremendously influenced a lot of people. He's influenced my life to a great extent. So yeah, I disagree with that characterization. When people praise his work or demonstrate an interest, that means a lot to him. Well, of course it does, Landau said. Hassan says his own father's approval trickled in slowly over the years, first when he got his master's degree, and later when he published his first book. Only when his father was in his 90s and in a nursing home did he give Hassan a full blessing. Well, you turned into a mensch. You turned into somebody I could be proud of, his sister Tia remembers him saying. He said, I love you, Hassan recalls. So the other thing is, if Hassan is recalling his father saying, I love you at this time, that kind of implies that he either did not often say it or never said it. And if that's, I'm not saying that that's the case, but if it was, that's a good way to manufacture the kind of person that gets recruited by cults. So parents, be nice to your kids and tell them that you love them. On January 6th, nearly 15 months after The Cult of Trump was published, Hassan watched as insurrectionists, that's a hard word to say that 3 times fast, insurrectionists, took the Capitol from his home in Newton, Massachusetts, where he now lives with Messiah and their teenage son. I could have done that, he thought. He'd recall thinking the same thing when he saw coverage of the Jonestown massacre in 1978. At the time, he felt guilty relating to the cult members, but in 2021, Hassan felt validated. And you know, I relate with that too. I don't think that I could have done the Jonestown thing, or at least with the kind of cult programming that I had been through. It was not sufficient for me to go through with a Jonestown massacre kind of a thing. But it was definitely sufficient for me to break the law for, to defy authorities for, and even potentially, like, I think that I could have been capable of violence at the time. The sole reason I did not engage in violence against abortion clinics and stuff like that at that time was because I thought it was ineffective. It wasn't because I thought it was wrong. And in fact, the leaders of the cult that I was in directly told like teenagers all the time, like they set up object lessons to demonstrate that it was acceptable to use force to fight abortion. And they just said this. And they had a summer camp every year where they taught this to teenagers. Like, it's crazy. So yeah, man, when he says that he could have been one of the Capitol insurrectionists, like, same for me. If I was still brainwashed, and if my brainwashing inclined me towards that set of beliefs, I definitely could have been one of those people there, for sure. 100%. Then came the media hits. CNN had him on twice in the span of a few weeks. Rick Wilson, the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, interviewed him on their live stream. A spot Hassan's wife said he woke up for at 3 a.m. In excitement, yeah. Katie Couric talked with him on her YouTube channel. And then there was a crop of explainer articles sharing Hassan's advice on how to save a loved one from the cult of Trump. I just don't even like that they're putting "save" in quotes. I don't think this is as controversial as they're making it out to be. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know what else to say, man. The most important thing is activating and educating people who don't like Trump to understand that they need to start building bridges back to their family and friends who are into Trump, and apologize if they called them nasty names. That's for sure. If you've been a dick to people because they're Trump supporters, you should apologize for that. Because, you know, there's lots of reasons people might be a Trump supporter. It might just be because of genuine political or moral convictions and you think that he's the right guy. And we should be nice to people that have different political opinions than us. That should be obvious. And then when we add this mind control aspect, this brainwashing aspect of things, that completely removes any basis for hatred that you can have. And ultimately, I think that's the reason this article is so resistant to what Hassan is saying, is because it removes their ability to hate people on the other side of the political aisle as they are. That's what's coming out in this article to me. So I would just encourage you to really think about it. If these people really are brainwashed, is it right to be angry at them? That's not to say that you shouldn't fight against their agenda, but you should be sympathetic to them. You should look at them as somebody who's like you, that found themselves either being approached by cult recruiters or going down a YouTube rabbit hole at the wrong time in their life. And that's the only difference between you and a cult member. That's it. Hassan told Vanity Fair, just say I miss you. You're my brother, or I miss you. You're my uncle. Can't we just be in each other's lives? I agree with that. And so there's more to this article, but I'm actually going to leave it there, because I think that's a good way to kind of end things. So if you stuck with me this long, I really, really appreciate it. Again, if you like it, make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell icon if you want to know when I'm doing these streams live, or if you just want to be notified when I have videos coming out. Share this stuff. Leave comments and have a discussion in the comments, please. It super duper helps me. It's going to help me get better equipment so that I can make better videos and reach more people. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me. Have fun. Love you guys.